Alright, in this video, I want to provide a little bit of clarification on verbalist clauses. We didn't talk much about these earlier, so I want to give you a chance to hear a little bit more about what these are and how they function. I covered it in the reading, but because we're moving so quickly in this quarter, I hadn't yet hit on it. But I wanted to provide that since several of you had requested that. So as a side note, if there's ever anything that you think could use more clarification, don't hesitate to let me know. You're likely speaking up for multiple people, so don't hesitate to tell me. So verbalist clauses. So I want to talk about generally what this is, what to do with them, and then look at the two examples from the test. And I noticed on the test that there were a couple of errors, so I want to address that on the practice test. I want to address that so as not to create confusion. So a verbalist clause, as the name implies, it's a clause that does not have an official verb. So what this is, in English we might say something like this. I, Daniel, am hungry. This is pretty much true most of the time. I am hungry. Now what I want you to pay attention to is this right here. In English we use forms of the to be verb to connect I with hungry, to equate the two. I am characterized by my hunger. Hebrew has the same sort of structure of connecting two nouns, or perhaps here we have a pronoun and an adjective. We could have a pronoun and a noun, anything that's equating two elements. But Hebrew just simply slaps the two next to each other and does not use a form of the to be verb in most cases, or it doesn't have to, and in verbalist clauses it does not. And so it puts these two next to each other. I hungry, sort of like Tarzan, if you ever watched Tarzan. I Tarzan, you Jane. Same idea here. So Hebrew has I hungry. So in Hebrew, it literally will be that, I hungry. English, because we don't typically talk like that unless we're Tarzan, we will supply the form of the to be verb in our translations. And as a side note, this explains why, if you're familiar, if you grew up with the King James English, occasionally, in King James and some other translations as well, you'll notice in italics forms of the to be verb. What they're often doing, the translations that use this strategy, they're italicizing the words that have been supplied that aren't technically in the original Hebrew, even though they're implied. In that word-for-word idea of translation, that goal of translating one Hebrew word for one English word, they realized you can't do that when you can't make sense of it in English without adding words. But they also wanted to stay true to their practice, so they put it in italics so that you know it wasn't original. So, I hungry is how you will read it, but for translating it, you'd put I am hungry. So to look at our two examples, the problem I noticed when I looked at the review was there were X's over two situations in the Jacob one, the Genesis 27 one, that were actually identifying construct chains. I think that was a confusion from having thought through construct earlier in the practice. But so looking at Genesis 27, verse 22. In the part that comes into question, we reading the Hebrew from the example, Vayomer, and he said, Hakol, so we have Hakol, lost my place, Hakol, Kol Yaakov. And I'm not going to write out Jacob. Hakol, Kol Yaakov. The voice, Kol, voice, and then this is in construct, voice of Jacob. The voice, Jacob, literally. The voice, Jacob. So the idea is that the voice, and then in English here we'll supply is. The voice is the voice of Jacob. So if you read that out, you would see that this is, verbless clauses are often identified. Sometimes there are situations in which it's ambiguous. It could be a verbless clause or it could be something else. It's usually identified most easily by simply translating the words out and realizing what you have before you and making the verbless clause sense kind of emerges. So when you see this, the voice Jacob. The sense kind of becomes intuitive after you look at that for a bit. The only way there is no absolute way to identify it, other than it'll be, as I said, two words being put next to each other. So it will either be a noun, pronoun, adjective on both words. So it couldn't be a verb. So it narrows down the situations in which you would actually expect it. So what was mistaken here is here we have the voice of Jacob's, and then later in the same verse we have the hands of Esau. And so it's the same thing, a misidentification of this construct as if it were a verbless clause. So please note that on the review. But in both cases, it's the voice is the voice of. The hands are the hands of, so forth. So that's the Genesis 27 example. The 2 Samuel version, not reading all the Hebrew, but calling attention to the only verbless clause in there, and it's this. Ata hope that you can see that still. Hope I didn't go too far over. Started too far toward the center, but ata ha-ish. This is my personal favorite verbless clause in Hebrew. You, so this is a pronoun that means you, second person singular. It's talking to a masculine second person singular entity. You, the man, ha-ish. In other words, you the man. So we actually have an example in English here where this is used sometimes in small talk and not in formal situations, obviously. But you the man, you the man. This is actually an example in English where we do what Hebrew does all the time. You, the man. So implied here, you are the man. You are the man. So again, as these two examples show, once you see it, it's easy to make sense of it. But as most of you will deal with, especially on the test, you'll be wondering, am I seeing it or am I not? Am I seeing something else? My best advice is to go through the verse and get a sense of what each word means. And you will usually narrow down to a couple of possibilities. When you have two nouns next to each other, or pronouns or something like that, not verbs or not particles or prepositions, when you have nouns, adjectives, or pronouns next to each other, they are likely in either construct or in a verbless clause. So you can narrow it down to those two, and then you have to figure out which one of the two makes the most sense. Those are informal ways of getting at the answer, but I think actually most cases are easier ways to get at the answer. But if you have these pronouns, you will always be dealing with a verbless clause, these specific pronouns, the independent pronouns. So again, on the test, just narrow down to where you have nouns next to each other, and you will likely find the sense emerging pretty naturally. All right, if you have any other questions, let me know. Again, we'll work through this, and you'll get used to it as you go along. But don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions.